In the dim glow of medieval hearths, a hidden world unfolded each night, one where humans and animals shared warmth, vigilance, and silent routines that defined life itself. Behind stone walls and timber frames, the placement of a cat, a dog, or a goat could mean comfort or survival, protection or peril. Superstition, hierarchy, and morality shaped every corner of a household, guiding not only chores and sleep, but the lessons children carried into adulthood. From frost-laden northern cottages to sun-baked southern estates, the rhythms of night wove together warmth, security, and social order in ways both practical and profound. Step into this nocturnal world where unseen dangers, quiet companions, and the intimate bonds between humans and animals reveal a medieval life far richer and far stranger than any daylight hours could show. In the year 1350, in the northern counties of England, a typical peasant household was a space of constant activity and overlapping functions, where the division between day and night was far less distinct than in modern homes. Most families lived in one or two-room timber-framed cottages with thatched roofs, and the primary living area served as kitchen, dining room, workspace, and bedroom. Beds were not solely for sleeping. They were storage areas for clothing, blankets, and sometimes even grain sacks, reflecting the practical demands of daily life. In wealthier households, such as the manor of Sir John de la Pole in Lincolnshire in 1372, bedrooms were slightly more defined, often small chambers adjoining a hall, but they were still multifunctional. The concept of private bedrooms was rare, and the boundaries between work, leisure, and rest were fluid, with servants and visitors often accommodated in the same spaces, especially during harvest or market seasons. Animals were a constant presence within these spaces, whether as livestock, pets, or both. Goats, sheep, and pigs were often kept in a corner of the living area or in a connected byre to provide warmth and ease of care. Dogs were a standard feature in both peasant and noble households, valued for protection, hunting, and companionship. Cats were equally common, particularly in regions such as East Anglia, where grain storage and rodent control made them indispensable. In 1365, the household accounts of John de Warenne, Earl of Surrey, note payments for food allocated to cats in the main hall, demonstrating that even nobles acknowledged the practical and social role of animals indoors. And some records also indicate that dogs were provided with blankets or straw bedding. Beds themselves reflected household hierarchies and family structure. In peasant cottages, the largest bed might accommodate the parents and one or two children, with smaller children or apprentices sleeping in straw pallets nearby. The positioning of animals was often strategic. Dogs lay near the door or hearth to guard the household, while cats slept on benches or in corners where they could keep warm and monitor the space for vermin. In larger estates, nobles' dogs had designated sleeping areas, often with cushions or low wooden platforms, indicating a household hierarchy that extended to the animal companions. Servants, apprentices, or seasonal laborers frequently shared the same bed or floor space, their proximity to animals providing both physical warmth and a measure of security in otherwise drafty structures, particularly during winter months. Medieval chronicles offer glimpses into the nighttime practices of these households. In 1390, the monk Thomas Walsingham described the lodging arrangements at a manor in Norfolk, noting that the family's small dog slept beside the Lord's bed while chickens roosted on beams above the hearth. Walsingham remarked on the constant movement of animals at night, from piglets curling near the hearth to cats slinking along benches, demonstrating that the presence of animals was not incidental but integral to the household rhythm. Similarly, in 1402, a French inventory of the Château de Vincennes recorded multiple beds for hounds adjacent to human sleeping quarters, underscoring how even in stone-built fortresses, animals occupied spaces designed for rest and safety. The interaction between humans and animals at night was not merely practical. It reflected social structures and domestic routines. The warmth of a dog curled at one's feet was both comfort and a reinforcement of the family hierarchy, with higher-ranking individuals typically securing the safest, warmest spots while lower-ranking members and animals occupied peripheral spaces. Children often learned early to recognize the presence and behavior of animals as part of household life, whether listening for a dog's alert bark or watching a cat's movements to gauge the state of stored grain. Pets could serve as companions, but livestock offered practical benefits, illustrating the dual purpose of these nighttime arrangements and the careful attention paid to animal well-being by household members. From humble cottages in Yorkshire to fortified manor houses in Normandy, shared sleeping spaces defined medieval life in ways that combine practicality, hierarchy, and social cohesion. The constant presence of animals within these domestic environments was both a necessity and a reflection of cultural norms. In homes where warmth, protection, and multifunctional space were paramount, humans and animals alike adapted to the rhythms of night, forging routines that were as pragmatic as they were enduring, shaping domestic life in ways that persisted for generations. In the year 1375, in the northern reaches of England, the cold was a constant companion, seeping through the thick stone walls of castles and timber cottages alike. Few homes had chimneys, and hearths were the primary source of heat, radiating warmth only to those in immediate proximity. In rural villages such as those surrounding York, timber-framed cottages with wattle and daub infill and thatched roofs were notoriously drafty, and during winter months, floors were often covered with rushes or straw in an attempt to retain whatever warmth the fire could provide. Wealthier households, including manors like that of Sir William de Mowbray in 1382, had slightly better heating systems, such as iron braziers or stone fireplaces in halls, but even these measures were insufficient against the bitter northern winters. The lack of insulation and the prevalence of damp conditions made indoor spaces cold, encouraging inhabitants to gather closely with both family and animals for warmth. Animals served as living heaters, a necessity as much as a comfort. Pigs, sheep, and goats huddled in corners of cottages or in byres connected to the main living areas, radiating body heat throughout the night. Dogs lay on straw pallets or near doorways, providing warmth for humans and a sense of security. Cats, nimble and light-bodied, nestled on benches, beds, or even atop storage chests to conserve their own warmth while keeping vermin in check. In 1378, a household account from the village of East Dereham recorded that both dogs and cats received rations specifically to encourage them to remain indoors, highlighting the dual purpose of their presence: practical warmth and household protection. Chroniclers of the period, including the monk Henry Knighton in Leicestershire, frequently noted how tightly families and animals slept together during harsh winters, a practice seen as both natural and necessary. Regional variations shaped the experience of cold indoors. In northern Europe, where winters could stretch from November to March with sub-zero temperatures, animals were often stabled inside homes or within attached barns. The connected structures allowed livestock to generate heat that permeated living spaces. In southern France and parts of Italy, winters were milder and outdoor stabling was more common, though small animals like dogs and cats were still welcomed indoors at night. Records from 1,385 inches Provence show that even in stone-built townhouses, household cats were fed and allowed to roam freely indoors, indicating that comfort, protection, and companionship were priorities regardless of climate. The dampness of medieval homes exacerbated the challenge of staying warm. Stone and timber walls absorbed moisture from rain and snow, and floors were prone to cold seepage. Families mitigated this with layered bedding, thick wool blankets, and by placing animals strategically to maximize shared warmth. In manor houses such as that of Sir John de Clavering in Northumberland, servants were instructed to ensure dogs were kept near human sleeping quarters during winter months, while pigs in adjoining byres contributed heat to the upper chambers. These arrangements were not merely practical but also ritualized. Careful placement of animals reflected knowledge passed down through generations about maintaining comfort and avoiding illness caused by prolonged exposure to damp cold. Chroniclers and household inventories offer concrete glimpses of these practices. In 1392, a manor account from Suffolk details the bedding of dogs on straw near the hall's fireplace, while cats roamed freely, hunting mice in storerooms and barns. In Normandy, the 1401 accounts of Château de Falaise record payments for straw and blankets not only for the family, but explicitly for domestic animals, emphasizing their recognized role in household health and nightly comfort. These sources suggest a deep understanding among medieval people of the interplay between warmth, damp conditions, and the strategic use of animals to mitigate environmental hardships. Thus, in both peasant cottages and noble manors, the cold and damp reality of medieval homes dictated sleeping arrangements and the integration of animals into nightly routines. Their presence was essential, offering both physical warmth and a buffer against the pervasive chill that could penetrate even the thickest stone walls. In spaces where comfort and survival intersected, humans and animals adapted together, creating shared patterns of rest that were as much about practicality as they were about survival, reflecting a nuanced understanding of the domestic environment and seasonal hardships faced across medieval Europe. In the year 1368, across the English Midlands and the borderlands of Scotland, the threat of theft, raiding, and wild animals was a constant concern for medieval households, shaping not only daily routines but also sleeping arrangements. In villages near market towns, cottages were often clustered for mutual defense, but individual homes relied on animals as the first line of protection. Dogs in particular were valued for their keen senses, capable of detecting intruders long before humans were aware. Chroniclers from the period, including the monk Thomas Walsingham, frequently noted the alertness of household dogs, describing instances where barking dogs awakened entire households to approaching bandits or wandering livestock that had escaped pens. In 1371, records from the manor of Sir Ralph de Cromwell in Lincolnshire detailed payments for a kennel of hounds maintained specifically to patrol the estate at night, emphasizing their role as both hunters and guardians. The strategic placement of animals within homes reflected an understanding of security and alarm. Dogs were often positioned near doorways, hearths, or windows, where they could monitor entries and alert the household to danger. Cats, while primarily valued for rodent control, also contributed to security by moving silently through rooms and occasionally startling intruders or drawing attention to unusual activity. In peasant cottages, a dog's presence at the threshold was as critical as a lock or a barred door, particularly in isolated locations where neighbors could not respond quickly. Evidence from 1382, in a chronicle from northern Yorkshire, recounts a story of a shepherd's dog that alerted the family to a group of marauding thieves attempting to steal sheep, allowing the household to defend their property and drive the intruders away before serious loss occurred. Livestock also played a role in household protection, particularly in rural settings where barns and byres were integrated with living spaces. Pigs and goats stabled indoors contributed to ambient noise, which could deter intruders who relied on silence. Historical accounts from estates, such as the manor of Sir Hugh de Neville in Norfolk, circa 1375, describe the practice of keeping sheep in attached barns, where their occasional bleating and movement during the night provided early warning signals to the household. Similarly, chickens roosting on beams in the main hall created a subtle awareness of nighttime activity, their startled calls alerting residents to disturbances outside or within the home. Castle and manor records further illustrate how animals contributed to security at larger estates. In 1395, the inventory of the fortified manor of Sir John de Grey in Suffolk included detailed instructions for dogs to be stationed along corridors and in entrance chambers, ensuring that both human and animal occupants were aware of any intrusion. Guards relied on these animals as part of their nightly patrols, understanding that their acute senses extended the range and effectiveness of human vigilance. Even in stone-built keeps, where thick walls offered protection from external threats, the movement and presence of animals provided a first layer of sensory awareness, complementing human watchmen stationed in towers or gatehouses. The integration of animals into nighttime protection was not only practical, but also culturally ingrained. Manuals on household management, such as those circulated among the gentry in eastern England during the late 14th century, recommended the use of dogs for guarding livestock and alerting family members to potential danger. Children were taught from an early age to interpret the behavior of animals as signals of threat, learning to respond to barking, growling, or sudden agitation. Folklore from the period reinforced these lessons, with tales of loyal hounds saving households from robbers or predatory wolves, emphasizing the dual role of animals as companions and protectors. From isolated peasant cottages to fortified manors along the Scottish-English border, the presence of animals at night served a crucial function in the medieval household. Their vigilance, whether through barking, movement, or subtle noise, created an early warning system that enhanced human safety and reinforced domestic routines. In a world where external threats were ever present, the strategic use of animals for protection and alarm became an integral part of survival, blending practicality with an intuitive understanding of behavior, environment, and household security. In the dark, cold nights of medieval Europe, not all threats to a household came from thieves or raiders. Often, the most persistent invaders were tiny, clawed, and relentless rats and mice that gnawed through grain, chewed on stored food, and spread disease. To combat these intruders, cats, small dogs, and sometimes ferrets became more than companions. They were essential protectors of both food and health. Their nightly patrols were as vital to a household as locks on doors or the presence of a watchman in the yard, particularly during harsh winters, when food scarcity made every sack of grain precious. By 1370, in towns and villages across England, France, and the Low Countries, animals played a central role in pest control. Urban homes, particularly in cities like Norwich and Rouen, faced constant pressure from rodents, especially in tightly packed timber-framed houses with nearby mills and granaries. Chroniclers recorded that households without vigilant cats suffered devastating infestations. In 1372, records from Rouen document payments to servants for feeding the cats that guard the larder, illustrating how much value was placed on feline vigilance. These animals were not mere pets, but functional members of the household economy, safeguarding food and sustaining the rhythms of daily life, sometimes working alongside dogs that patrolled courtyards and entryways at night. The strategic placement of animals was deliberate. Dogs were often stationed near doorways or hearths, deterring intruders and discouraging rats from venturing into the living areas. Cats patrolled corners, window ledges, and even high beams where vermin might lurk. A 1,383 household inventory from the manor of Sir Geoffrey de Mandeville in Essex specifies 3 cats for the hall and chamber, 1 for the granary, demonstrating the careful assignment of animals to critical areas. Monasteries, which stored large quantities of grain and preserved foods for monks, similarly depended on cats. Records from the Abbey of St. Evroul in Normandy indicate multiple felines were kept on duty to protect food stores from destruction by rodents. Even smaller urban households maintained at least 1 cat for protection, often feeding it scraps from the evening meal. Animals' role extended beyond simple hunting. Livestock, including goats, sheep, and pigs, were often kept in connected byres or even inside the main living area during colder months. Their movement created low-level activity that disturbed potential nesting sites for pests, while their body heat contributed to a warmer, less hospitable environment for vermin. Medieval chroniclers, such as William of Malmesbury, noted that the constant presence of animals at night helped maintain a functional and orderly household, reducing the spread of disease indirectly by controlling rodent populations. In some rural areas, poultry were also allowed to sleep indoors, their scratching and pecking helping to keep floors and stored grains clear of vermin. Beliefs about hygiene, though not scientific by modern standards, reinforced these practices. Household manuals from the 14th century recommended cats near food stores and dogs near doors to protect both body and bread from corruption. These animals were seen as preventative measures against contamination, spoilage. Urban kitchens benefited greatly from cats' presence, with the agile hunters roaming pantries, larders, and grain stores, while vigilant dogs outside discouraged rats from entering from streets or alleys. The combined effect of multiple species created a layered defense system that protected households from both physical and economic harm. Regional differences affected these practices. In Northern Europe, with stone cottages and timber frames, cats and small dogs roamed freely indoors, patrolling at night, while livestock were often housed in connected byres. In Southern Europe, where homes included walled courtyards or separate stables, Animals' roles adapted, with cats still circulating indoors for rodent control but larger livestock kept apart. Records from Normandy and Flanders between 1380 and 1385 reflect these variations, showing how climate, architecture, and local habits shaped animal-human interactions. From peasant cottages to urban townhouses and monastic refectories, animals were indispensable in controlling pests and maintaining a semblance of hygiene. Their nocturnal vigilance protected food stores, discouraged vermin, and sustained household health. In medieval homes, the line between companion and caretaker blurred, with animals acting as both living guardians and practical tools in the daily struggle for survival, their presence quietly ensuring the household's continuity through harsh winters, overcrowded conditions, and unpredictable threats. In the long, lonely nights of medieval Europe, the absence of artificial light and the isolation of rural households created a profound sense of solitude for many. Peasant cottages were often far from neighbors, with dense forests, moors, or marshlands surrounding them. In 1367, a survey of villages in Northumberland reported that the average farmstead was at least half a mile from the next, leaving family members to rely heavily on each other and their animals for company. Dogs, cats, and sometimes smaller livestock such as goats or pigs became constant companions, providing both comfort and a sense of shared presence during dark hours. Monks and nuns in isolated monasteries similarly experienced nights of quiet and seclusion. In 1382, records from the Abbey of Saint-Benoît-sur-Loire in central France detail how cats were permitted in the cloistered quarters, allowed to sleep near the monks' cells to provide warmth and companionship. Chroniclers remarked that these animals reduced the feeling of loneliness and anxiety among the inhabitants, who otherwise faced strict routines of prayer, study, and labor. For many, a purring cat beside one's bed or a small dog curled at one's feet was a welcome reminder of life outside the strict monastic regimen, offering both emotional solace and a tactile warmth absent from stone walls. In peasant households, companionship from animals was similarly vital. Children often shared their beds with dogs or cats, particularly during winter months when temperatures dropped sharply. A 1374 household account from Suffolk mentions payments for a young hound to sleep with the master's children, highlighting the dual purpose of warmth and security. Small livestock, such as goats, might also sleep indoors for protection and for the comfort of their human caretakers. The presence of these animals reduced the psychological strain of isolation, particularly for widows, elderly family members, or single laborers who lived apart from their extended kin. Folklore and local tradition reinforced the bond between humans and animals at night. In 1391, a chronicler in Brittany recounted stories of dogs that would stay close to solitary sleepers, alerting them to sounds in the dark and warding off both wild predators and supernatural threats. Cats were believed to have protective qualities as well. Their nocturnal vigilance was thought to safeguard the household from spirits or ill fortune. These beliefs, while partly superstitious, encouraged humans to welcome animals into intimate spaces, strengthening companionship through both practical and cultural channels. Letters and personal accounts occasionally reveal the depth of attachment medieval people felt for their animal companions. In 1403, a merchant in Rouen wrote to his brother about his two dogs, describing how their presence in his small room alleviated the strain of long nights spent alone while he tended to his accounts and correspondence. Similarly, children in rural Normandy were recorded seeking out the warmth and reassurance of their cats, particularly during stormy nights when the wind rattled shutters and windows. The emotional bond created a sense of security that extended beyond physical comfort. Animals were active participants in the household's rhythm, responding to sound, movement, and mood, and providing a stabilizing presence. Isolation was not limited to rural or monastic life. Urban households, often crowded yet socially detached, relied on animals for companionship as well. Cats and small dogs were not only pest controllers, but also constant presences in kitchens, chambers, and attics, bridging the gap between family members who labored long hours and the quiet of nighttime. In some cases, animals slept on benches or pallets near the hearth, ensuring that the warmth of the fire was shared while providing a tactile reminder of life in an otherwise solitary environment. From remote cottages in Northumbria to cloistered abbeys in central France and crowded urban homes in Rouen, animals served as vital companions during medieval nights. They mitigated the harshness of isolation, provided emotional comfort, and established a rhythm of interaction that balanced practical needs with psychological well-being. In a world without artificial light, distant neighbors, or modern forms of entertainment, the presence of an animal beside the bed or on the floor became an enduring source of solace, warmth, and companionship that shaped the intimate experience of medieval domestic life. In the northern counties of England and across much of Europe during the 14th century, the line between living space and livestock housing was often blurred, particularly during the colder months. In 1352, survey records from Yorkshire describe peasant cottages with attached byres, where goats, sheep, and occasionally pigs were kept under the same roof as the family's main living area. This arrangement was far from unusual. It provided warmth from the animal's body heat and allowed for easier management, particularly in regions where frost, snow, or heavy rains made outdoor chores arduous. Proximity also made milking, feeding, and tending to livestock significantly more convenient during the long winter nights, reducing the risk of animals suffering from exposure or neglect. In wealthier households, the arrangement differed but shared the same principle of practicality. Manors and castles often maintained stabling areas within or adjacent to the main structure. For example, the manor of Sir Richard de Beauchamp in Warwickshire in 1375 had a stable block connected by a covered passage to the main hall. This allowed servants to tend to horses, cows, and goats without exposure to freezing winds or precipitation. Large estates typically scheduled nighttime checks on livestock, and having animals nearby meant that feeding and milking could be accomplished with minimal delay, ensuring the household ran efficiently from the earliest morning hours and preventing potential losses from unattended animals. Seasonal labor patterns dictated the presence of animals indoors as well. During lambing season or the calving period, animals were often brought inside to provide shelter and protection from predators. Records from a 1368 survey of the manor of East Lothian in Scotland describe sheep and goats kept in partially enclosed sections of the Great Hall during cold months, allowing shepherds to monitor births and quickly address complications. This arrangement also allowed the family to use the animal's warmth to maintain slightly more comfortable conditions within drafty stone or timber structures, where fireplaces were typically the only source of heat, and ensured newborn livestock survived the harshest winter nights. Livestock management in castles and monasteries often mirrored peasant practices, though on a larger scale. At Fountains Abbey in Yorkshire in 1384, accounts detail multiple cows and goats housed in stables connected to the main cloister. Monks were expected to milk cows early in the morning, a task made easier by their close quarters at night. Similarly, horses in noble estates were stabled in secure areas close to the kitchens, providing both convenience and security. These arrangements ensured that essential morning routines, from milking to feeding, were conducted efficiently, with minimal exposure to the harsh elements that defined medieval winters, while also facilitating rapid responses to any problems that arose overnight. The convenience of indoor livestock also served defensive purposes. In regions prone to raids or attacks, such as the Scottish borders in 1361, keeping animals within or adjacent to the household minimized the risk of theft. Historical accounts from Berwick-upon-Tweed describe households securing both people and livestock under one roof during skirmishes, allowing families to maintain both warmth and protection in a single consolidated space. This practical approach underscored how survival, domestic economy, and human-animal interaction were intertwined during the medieval period, emphasizing the strategic and utilitarian nature of indoor livestock care. Practicality extended beyond warmth and security. Animals indoors allowed for quicker responses to emergencies, such as illness or injury. Ailing livestock could be monitored continuously, while their proximity allowed household members to provide care at any hour. At smaller cottages, even goats or pigs would be tethered inside the main room, offering both easy access and constant companionship. Servants and children alike learned to navigate the shared space, understanding the rhythms of feeding, cleaning, and animal behavior as part of household life, integrating these practices into everyday routines without disrupting human activities. From peasant cottages in East Anglia to fortified manors in Warwickshire and monastic complexes in Yorkshire, indoor livestock management was a cornerstone of practical medieval living. Animals provided warmth, eased labor demands, and allowed for the careful monitoring of valuable resources. The cohabitation of humans and livestock was not born of affection alone. It was a necessity dictated by climate, geography, and the daily rhythms of medieval survival. In these spaces, domestic convenience and livestock care were inseparable, demonstrating the pragmatic adaptability of medieval households and the enduring interdependence between humans and their animals. In the shadowed nights of medieval Europe, fear and superstition were as common as cold stone walls and flickering hearths. From peasants' cottages to noble halls, households sought protection not only from thieves and wild animals, but from forces unseen spirits, demons and witches said to roam the dark. Animals were often enlisted as guardians against these supernatural threats, their presence believed to repel evil and maintain household safety. Folklore intertwined with daily life, shaping the way people thought about night, darkness, and the creatures that shared their homes, often dictating where and how animals were housed and cared for throughout the year. By 1360, chroniclers across England, France, and Germany recorded the use of cats, dogs, and even geese in protective household roles. In East Anglia, villagers claimed that black cats sleeping at the foot of a bed could guard against malevolent spirits, while dogs that slept near thresholds were thought to alert families to approaching witches. Manuscripts from Normandy in 1375 recount a noble household that kept a tabby cat in the main chamber during a series of nights, when strange sounds had been heard in the hall, asserting that the cat's movements deterred the invisible entities believed to be responsible. Some households also included multiple animals for layered protection, combining cats, dogs, and even small livestock in strategic locations throughout the living space. Animals were not merely symbolic. Their behavior reinforced superstitions and gave them a practical authority in the household. A dog that barked at midnight or a cat that hissed at a shadow could be interpreted as a warning of evil presence or impending misfortune. In this way, folklore validated the animal's nighttime roles, combining utility and belief. Monastic records from 1388 at Saint Denis Abbey in northern France describe cats kept specifically in the infirmary and storerooms, not only to catch rats, but also because monks considered them spiritual protectors against invisible miasmas thought to cause disease or haunt the sick. Even small movements by geese or chickens were seen as signs of supernatural disturbance or reassurance. Local charm practices reinforced these ideas. In Brittany, around 1372, peasants tied small charms or ribbons to cats' collars, believing that their prowling would carry protective energy throughout the home. Dogs were sometimes anointed with oils or herbs to enhance their perceived ability to sense and repel evil. In 1395, a household in Rouen recorded purchasing lavender and rosemary for the dogs, both for scent and as apotropaic symbols intended to guard the house and its inhabitants during long winter nights. Geese, chickens, and even pigs were sometimes incorporated into ritualistic roles, with their noises interpreted as omens or protective signals, and certain breeds were specifically chosen for their alertness and vigilance at night. The intertwining of superstition and practicality is evident across regions. In northern Europe, stone cottages and enclosed timber halls emphasized enclosed spaces where animals could be present at night, reinforcing the sense that the creatures themselves were defenders against both physical and spiritual threats. In southern Europe, where homes often had walled courtyards or separate stables, cats and dogs still circulated within living spaces, maintaining vigilance and serving as conduits for protective beliefs. Household accounts from Florence in 1380 note expenditures for feeding cats in the kitchens, justified both as pest control and as part of a broader superstitious household practice. Medieval folklore also influenced the placement of animals during sleep. Cats on window ledges, dogs by the doorway, and geese near sleeping quarters were arranged not only for convenience or warmth, but to create protective zones around vulnerable family members. Stories passed down in rural France and Germany describe spirits leaving quietly when dogs barked or cats arched their backs at unseen threats, reinforcing the perception that animals were integral to human safety after dark, and households often altered arrangements seasonally according to superstitious guidance. Across Europe, from peasant cottages in East Anglia to fortified manors in Burgundy, animals were woven into a network of superstition, folklore, and practical protection. Their nocturnal presence served dual purposes, safeguarding food, property, and health, while also providing a layer of spiritual and psychological comfort against the unknown dangers of the night. The rhythms of household life, intertwined with belief, created a world where animals were both companions and guardians, reflecting the deeply pragmatic and superstitious nature of medieval society. In a Devon manor in 1378, the lord's prized hound slept in chambers just steps from his bed, while lesser dogs patrolled corridors and kitchens, maintaining order without a single word. Across medieval Europe, the placement of animals in sleeping quarters reflected more than practicality. It mirrored social hierarchy and domestic structure. From modest peasant cottages to sprawling noble estates, where and how animals slept revealed the household's rank, wealth, and values, intertwining comfort, utility, and prestige, while also demonstrating cultural attitudes toward animals as integral members of daily life, not merely tools or adornments. In peasant homes, multifunctional living areas meant that humans and animals shared the same space out of necessity. Dogs curled near hearths to provide warmth and alert families to intruders, while cats roamed benches and corners, keeping grain stores free from vermin. Beds were communal, with parents and older children occupying the largest sleeping platform, and younger children or apprentices lying on straw pallets nearby. Animals filled the peripheral spaces, enhancing both security and household efficiency. Records from Yorkshire in 1369 detail a peasant cottage where 3 goats were kept near the hearth, and a dog slept by the door, reflecting a practical arrangement born of climate, economy, and everyday survival. Noble estates offered a more formalized approach. At Château de Blois in 1385, household accounts recorded beds for hunting dogs and cushions for lap cats, indicating carefully managed spaces for different animals. Their proximity to the lord or lady's private quarters reflected status, distinguishing prized pets from working animals. Large estates also allocated sleeping arrangements to servants and apprentices, who might share beds with dogs in drafty stone halls. Chronicler Thomas Walsingham, writing in 1391, described a Norfolk manor where a greyhound occupied a velvet cushion beside the master's bed, while lesser dogs and cats patrolled the rest of the household, creating a layered domestic order in which humans and animals alike occupied spaces according to rank. Animals themselves reinforced social distinctions. Prized hunting dogs received individual care, specialized feeding, and high-quality bedding, becoming symbols of prestige as much as functional helpers. In contrast, barn cats, small dogs, and livestock in main halls or byres contributed primarily through their utility. Estate inventories from 1382 Burgundy noted separate allocations for lapdogs and barn cats, illustrating a dual system that balanced practical household needs with status signaling. Even the way animals were addressed and attended reflected their perceived rank. Lapdogs might be lifted onto chairs or cushioned platforms, while barn cats patrolled the ground and barns with little ceremony. Households also trained animals to follow specific nighttime routines, reinforcing their roles and maintaining domestic order. Regional differences further influenced these arrangements. In England and northern France, stone-built manors allowed pets elevated platforms or private chambers near the master's quarters, emphasizing status. Timber-framed cottages in rural regions often had animals integrated fully into the main living space, with no separation between humans and livestock. Between 1375 and 1385, inventories from Normandy and Flanders documented both approaches, showing how architecture, climate, and social hierarchy shaped nighttime interactions between humans and animals. The interaction extended beyond comfort or warmth. Animals were assigned functional roles according to household rank. Dogs near the Lord's bed could act as both companions and early warning systems, while cats and smaller animals managed vermin, contributing to food security. In peasant households, animals' presence served more practical needs, but still reinforced subtle hierarchies within the space, teaching children and servants early lessons in domestic structure and responsibility. Animals were simultaneously companions, workers, and markers of social order, and their behavior often influenced family routines and nighttime vigilance in ways recorded by chroniclers of the period. From the modest cottages of East Anglia to fortified manors in the Loire Valley, animals' sleeping arrangements reflected the intersection of class, hierarchy, and practicality. In every household, the positioning of dogs, cats, and livestock conveyed both social order and domestic function. Warmth, protection, and efficiency were universal concerns, but the status of humans and animals determined the details of coexistence. Medieval households operated as intricate systems where rank and routine guided every corner, and animals, whether pets, guards, or livestock, were woven deeply into the social fabric, embodying the household's hierarchy as clearly as the stones of its walls or the tapestries on its halls. Frost crept along the edges of thatched roofs, and the early winter nights stretched endlessly in cottages and manor halls alike, forcing humans and animals into closer quarters than at any other time of year. Seasonal changes dictated not only work and diet, but the very rhythms of sleep, shaping how households arranged beds, pallets, and byres. In 1363, a survey of northern English villages noted that sheep, goats, and even pigs were regularly brought indoors from October through March, housed in connected byres or sections of the main hall to provide warmth and protection from frost and snow. The practice was far from simple comfort. Proximity allowed families to monitor livestock, tend to births, and reduce the labor burden of trekking to distant barns in freezing conditions. Heating sources were minimal, and even a small hearth often failed to reach every corner, making the presence of animals essential for warmth and overall household survival. Human sleeping arrangements shifted alongside the seasons as well. In peasant cottages, families clustered on the largest bed during winter months, sharing warmth under thick woolen blankets or feather mattresses. Children and apprentices were often placed on straw pallets nearby, but even these peripheral sleeping spaces were strategically located near hearths or animals to maximize heat. Noble estates, while more spacious, mirrored this logic. At the manor of Sir Geoffrey de Neville in Yorkshire in 1377, accounts record the temporary relocation of prized hounds and lap cats into chambers adjoining the Lord's winter quarters, ensuring both warmth for the animals and companionship for the family. Pets were sometimes wrapped in additional blankets or allowed to rest on cushions, creating micro-environments of heat for humans and animals alike. Summer brought a very different set of routines. With longer daylight hours and warmer temperatures, livestock were moved to outdoor pens, pastures, or detached stables, reducing heat within living quarters and allowing the main hall to remain cooler. Cats, however, continued to patrol human sleeping areas to control vermin, which became more active in barns and granaries during the warmer months. French records from 1381 indicate that monks at the Abbey of Saint Michel de Cuxa allowed their cats to circulate freely indoors year-round, citing both pest control and the unpredictability of mountain weather as justification for keeping some animals close even in summer. Occasional summer storms also necessitated bringing smaller animals indoors temporarily, highlighting the flexibility of seasonal arrangements. Temperature, architecture, and regional climate all played roles in these practices. Northern England, with its stone-built cottages and timber halls, relied heavily on the body heat of animals during long winters, while southern France and Italy, with walled courtyards and separate stables, saw more seasonal separation of humans and livestock. In Normandy, household inventories from 1,375 to 1,380 note movable partitions and temporary indoor stalls constructed each autumn to accommodate goats and pigs for the winter months, then removed in spring. These adaptations highlight the pragmatic nature of medieval domestic life, where survival, efficiency, and comfort were balanced according to the seasons. Children and elderly members of households were particularly affected by seasonal shifts. Cold-sensitive individuals were placed closest to animals and hearths during harsh months, while in warmer periods, sleeping arrangements were rearranged to prevent overheating and pests. Chronicler Thomas Walsingham, in 1390, remarked on a Norfolk manor where winter arrangements placed children near the hearth and dogs at the periphery, while summer bedding moved the youngest sleepers closer to open windows to benefit from cool night air. Seasonal adaptation thus shaped both comfort and hierarchy within shared sleeping spaces. The interplay between humans and animals extended beyond warmth. Winter cohabitation also facilitated early morning chores, milking, and care for newborn livestock, while summer separation allowed for more hygienic conditions and less risk of vermin infestation. Seasonal awareness dictated the placement of cats, dogs, and livestock in ways that balanced domestic efficiency, comfort, and health, illustrating the constant negotiation between environmental pressures and household routines. From the frost-laden cottages of Yorkshire to the sun-warmed halls of southern France, seasonal shifts dictated not only human behavior, but also the roles and sleeping patterns of animals. Each household adapted to the rhythms of nature, using space, heat, and animal companionship to survive winter nights and optimize summer days. The ebb and flow of the seasons structured life itself, binding humans and animals into a continuous cycle of care, warmth, and vigilance that defined medieval domestic practice. Households became finely tuned systems, with every living being from child to goat fitting into the seasonal order to endure both cold and heat efficiently. Even the quietest household nights carried unseen dangers, not from thieves or wolves, but from tiny, invisible threats that medieval people struggled to understand. Disease shaped daily routines, and human-animal cohabitation presented both comfort and potential risk. Despite limited knowledge of contagion, families recognized that the presence of animals indoors could affect health, prompting a delicate balance between warmth, protection, and hygiene. Candles flickered across stone and timber walls, and the mingling smells of livestock, cooking fires, and human sweat created an environment where care and caution were constant necessities. By the mid-14th century, recurring plagues and epidemics heightened awareness of illness. In towns and villages across Europe, records from 1349 during the Black Death note that households attempted to minimize exposure to foul smells and decaying waste, yet livestock and pets remained inside living areas. Chroniclers describe families relying on dogs and cats for warmth, pest control, and security, even while fearing the spread of disease. Parish registers from Norfolk and Suffolk indicate payments to feed cats indoors, suggesting that practical necessity often outweighed concern about potential health risks. Families balanced vigilance with necessity, understanding intuitively which animals could sleep nearby and which should remain at a careful distance. The dual role of animals' companions and carriers was understood intuitively, if not scientifically. Dogs slept near doors or hearths to guard against intruders, and cats patrolled food stores, reducing rodent populations that could spoil grain or carry fleas. Fleas, lice, and other vectors were known to cause discomfort, though their connection to disease was not fully understood. Household manuals from the late 14th century advised keeping animals slightly apart from beds while maintaining their access to key areas for protection and warmth. At the manor of Sir Robert de Clifford in Westmoreland in 1376, servants were instructed to ensure dogs and cats had specific sleeping locations that allowed proximity without direct contact with human bedding, illustrating the careful negotiation of domestic space and safety. Seasonal and regional variations also shaped risk management. In northern England, where cold winters demanded close quarters, animals were often kept indoors despite potential contamination. In contrast, southern French and Italian estates with milder climates could separate livestock more effectively, stabling them outside while allowing cats to circulate indoors for vermin control. French abbeys, such as the Abbey of Saint-Germain-des-Prés in 1382, maintained records detailing the rotation of cats in kitchens and storerooms to prevent excessive accumulation of waste and reduce the risk of infection. reflecting a blend of superstition, observation, and practical hygiene. Despite these precautions, outbreaks occasionally highlighted the risks of shared spaces. In urban centers like Rouen and Paris, where houses were densely packed and hygiene limited, fleas and lice carried by indoor animals contributed to discomfort and illness. Chronicler Jean de Venette observed in 1371 that families attempted to isolate sick animals, though limited understanding meant this was not always effective. Veterinary texts from the period also advised inspection of livestock for signs of disease, reflecting an awareness that human and animal health were intertwined, even if causation was poorly understood. Families often cleaned floors, swept straw, and replaced bedding frequently, combining intuition with practical care. Interestingly, practical routines often mitigated risks without explicit scientific knowledge. Nighttime vigilance, the strategic placement of animals, and the removal of bedding or refuse from sleeping areas helped minimize exposure to pathogens. Even in cottages, a dog's position by the door or a cat's patrol of a grain store reduced opportunities for vermin-borne illness, indirectly protecting the household. Seasonal rotation of livestock indoors and outdoors further minimized prolonged exposure to waste or potential contamination during warmer months, while herbs and simple fumigants were sometimes burned near sleeping areas to reduce odors and pests. By the end of the 14th century, household accounts, inventories, and manuals demonstrate an evolving awareness of disease risk, even as animals remained indispensable for warmth, protection, and companionship. The presence of pets and livestock indoors was a calculated compromise, balancing comfort, security, and the subtle threats posed by vermin, fleas, and filth. From rural cottages in East Anglia to fortified manors in Burgundy, medieval households negotiated these dangers pragmatically, integrating animals into daily life while striving to maintain health in an age of limited medical understanding. Frosted rooftops, sun-baked courtyards, and storm-lashed coasts dictated the rhythm of life for both humans and animals, shaping where they slept, worked, and survived. From the bustling streets of Paris to the remote highlands of Scotland, households adapted to geography, climate, and local custom, producing a wide variety of domestic arrangements. No single standard existed. Regional conditions, traditions, available resources, and even local superstition determined the structure of domestic life, influencing where cats prowled, dogs curled, and livestock were stabled. These differences reveal not only practical adaptation, but also the subtle social, cultural, and economic priorities embedded in daily life, as each household balanced warmth, security, and efficiency according to its own needs. In northern England and Scotland, freezing winters and relentless damp made indoor cohabitation with animals essential. Timber-framed cottages often included attached byres or designated corners of the main hall where goats, sheep, and pigs stayed warm. Their body heat supplemented the meager warmth of central hearths, reducing frostbite and providing comfort during long, dark nights. Dogs lay near doorways or fires, alerting households to intruders, while cats patrolled benches, lofts, and granaries to keep rodents at bay. Records from Yorkshire in 1365 describe peasants moving livestock indoors from late autumn until early spring, illustrating a seasonal survival strategy where frost and snow rendered outdoor pens useless. Children often slept near animals for warmth, learning early how human and animal routines intertwined. Even meals and chores were affected. Milking and feeding were scheduled around nighttime proximity, emphasizing how animals' indoor presence structured daily life. Households in southern France, Italy, and Spain relied on different spatial solutions. Stone houses, walled courtyards, and detached stables allowed greater separation between humans and livestock. Cats continued to circulate indoors to hunt vermin, but larger animals were usually stabled outside, reducing heat and odors in living quarters during long, hot summers. Inventories from Provençal estates between 1,370 and 1,380 describe temporary stalls for goats near kitchens, while hounds occupied covered yet detached kennels. Social hierarchy was also reflected in placement. Prized lapdogs or hunting hounds remained close to their masters, while working animals were positioned peripherally. In addition, certain estates recorded the use of geese or smaller fowl indoors during winter for early warning against intruders or supernatural fears, showing how superstition intertwined with practicality. These arrangements balanced climate, convenience, and status. Urban centers demanded further adaptation. Narrow timber houses in Rouen, Bruges, and Lubeck left little room for livestock, so small, multi-purpose animals became crucial. Dogs and cats served as companions, pest controllers, and early warning systems, while larger livestock were kept in communal barns or rented stables. Municipal regulations often specified feeding and sleeping arrangements for cats and dogs to reduce vermin and maintain order, showing how civic concern combined with practical necessity. Townspeople tailored indoor arrangements to maximize safety and efficiency, blending utility with superstition. Children learned early to navigate cramped quarters alongside animals, observing subtle signals of both comfort and danger. Monastic and noble households added another layer of complexity. Abbeys in Normandy and Flanders, with extensive kitchens and grain stores, kept multiple cats indoors year-round, both to deter vermin and as symbolic guardians. Noble estates across Burgundy and the Loire Valley assigned dogs to chambers based on hierarchy, while livestock was stabled just beyond main halls. Seasonal rotations, movable partitions, and temporary stalls allowed households to respond flexibly to winter cold or summer heat, ensuring warmth, hygiene, and security. Coastal northern German communities sometimes allowed pigs indoors during storms, while inland areas preferred detached pens. In Italy's Po Valley, courtyard layouts and mild winters allowed cats to roam freely, while larger livestock rarely entered human quarters. Across Europe, climate, architecture, household wealth, and local custom shaped where animals and humans coexisted. Families negotiated practical, social, and cultural demands, arranging sleeping spaces, byres, and patrol routes. From frost-laden highlands to sunlit Mediterranean estates, households adapted to balance warmth, protection, and efficiency. Cats, dogs, and livestock were integral participants in domestic survival, reflecting how human needs, environmental pressures, and tradition shaped nocturnal rhythms. From bustling towns to remote villages and noble manors, nightfall revealed the depth of human-animal interdependence. Warmth, security, and practicality guided sleeping arrangements, while regional climate, social hierarchy, and seasonal shifts created distinctive patterns. Across Europe, humans and animals adapted together, forming resilient domestic routines that were pragmatic, culturally embedded, and enduring testament to a world where survival, companionship, and household order were inseparable. Candles flickered in the shadowed halls of abbeys and manor chambers, casting long shapes across stone floors, and with every flicker came questions of morality, sin, and divine favor even in the smallest domestic details. Medieval households did not see animals purely as practical companions. Their presence, behavior, and treatment carried deep religious and moral significance. From humble cottages to sprawling noble estates, the ways in which animals were housed, fed, and allowed to sleep were often guided by both spiritual beliefs and social expectations, entwining domestic practice with faith. By the mid-14th century, Christian doctrine permeated daily life, dictating not only prayer and ritual, but the ethical treatment of all creatures. Monastic rules such as the Benedictine rule emphasized stewardship and compassion, mandating that animals be cared for properly, particularly those providing essential services, like oxen, horses, and hunting dogs. Records from Fountains Abbey in Yorkshire, dated 1383, specify regular feeding and sheltering for cats and dogs within kitchen and storeroom areas, illustrating a dual purpose: practical pest control and moral duty. The monks believed that cruelty toward animals was sinful and that neglect could reflect poorly on one's soul, tying domestic management to spiritual accountability. In noble households, moral considerations often intersected with status and hierarchy. Hunting dogs, prized lap cats, and livestock were not merely tools. Their treatment reflected a family's honor and virtue. Chroniclers noted that nobles who failed to provide adequate warmth, bedding, or sustenance for their animals could be criticized both socially and spiritually. In 1378, a French inventory from the Château de Blois recorded lavish bedding for hounds and lapcats, demonstrating care motivated as much by religious propriety as by comfort or prestige. Similarly, sermons of the period sometimes invoke the proper treatment of animals as an example of godly stewardship, warning that neglect could invite divine disfavor. Peasant households integrated moral perspectives with necessity. While animals were central to warmth, security, and food production, there was a recognized expectation of humane care. Cats patrolling grain stores, dogs guarding cottages, or goats stabled in the main hall were often treated with functional kindness, fed on scraps, provided shelter from frost, but also acknowledged as creatures of God deserving consideration. Parish records from Norfolk in 1369 note instances where villagers were admonished for cruelty toward livestock or working dogs, showing that moral oversight extended beyond abbeys and noble estates into everyday village life. Religious festivals and church teachings also influenced animal sleeping arrangements. Feast days or saints' days might dictate movement or ritual for animals, particularly those associated with household prosperity. For example, St. Anthony's Day was traditionally linked to the blessing of animals, with cats, dogs, and livestock, sometimes brought indoors for prayer and protection. Accounts from 1,385 inches Burgundy describe clergy blessing hounds before winter hunts, an acknowledgement that spiritual care complemented practical utility, linking the sacred and domestic spheres. Animals themselves were woven into moral and spiritual narratives. Medieval bestiaries, sermons, and popular tales imbued creatures with symbolic significance. Cats represented vigilance, dogs loyalty, and certain livestock patience or endurance. These associations influenced household treatment and placement, as an animal's perceived virtue could dictate where it slept or how it was attended. In noble and monastic homes alike, keeping animals near warmth or in protective quarters was thus not only practical but morally resonant, affirming the household's piety through everyday routine. Even in ordinary cottages, these principles persisted. Feeding animals before the family ate, ensuring warmth, and avoiding cruelty were framed as both ethical and spiritually beneficial practices. The lines between practicality, hierarchy, and morality blurred, illustrating how medieval Europeans understood domestic life as inseparable from faith. Caring for animals was a reflection of household order, compassion, and alignment with divine expectations. From monastic refectories to peasant hovels and noble chambers, religious and moral perspectives shaped how animals were integrated into nightly routines. Cats, dogs, and livestock were more than companions or tools. They were participants in an ethical and spiritual ecosystem, their care reflecting the household's virtue as clearly as its walls or its hearth. In this way, domestic practice became a daily act of piety, where warmth, security, and moral conscience intertwined beneath candlelight and the watchful eyes of both humans and God. Tiny hands traced the fur of cats and dogs, and curious eyes followed the movements of goats, pigs, and chickens, long before any formal schooling began. In every corner of a medieval household, from drafty cottages in northern England to sun-baked estates in Provence, children grew up in constant interaction with animals. These creatures were not merely companions, they were teachers, guardians, and silent instructors, shaping daily routines, moral lessons, and practical skills that would last a lifetime. Childhood, in essence, was inseparable from the rhythms, responsibilities, and subtle guidance dictated by the animals that shared their homes, forming the first patterns of care and cooperation. In peasant cottages, animals were central to both survival and education. Goats, pigs, and sheep, kept in corners of the main hall or adjacent byres during harsh winters, radiated heat that softened the bite of stone floors. Dogs curled near doors, alerting the household to intruders and teaching children the value of vigilance and awareness. Cats prowled benches, lofts, and granaries, silently demonstrating attentiveness, patience, and observation. Records from Yorkshire in 1372 describe children helping to milk goats indoors during freezing nights, a task requiring coordination, skill, and constant awareness of the animal's moods. From such chores, children absorbed early lessons in household management, responsibility, and survival, learning the intertwined rhythms of care, work, and domestic order, while also developing confidence and a sense of empathy toward living beings. Noble households offered parallel lessons framed by hierarchy and prestige. Hunting hounds and lapcats were both symbols of status and vehicles for instruction. Children were taught to handle and train hounds, learning obedience, hierarchy, and patience, while smaller pets cultivated empathy and attentiveness. Inventories from Chateau de Blois in 1385 even list animals assigned to children's chambers, indicating a deliberate effort to instill responsibility within a structured domestic environment. Pets acted as intermediaries. Children exercised authority over animals under supervision, learning leadership, care, and respect for household hierarchy, while also gaining early exposure to social norms and household organization. Seasonal shifts intensified these lessons. Winter brought animals indoors, increasing contact and demanding constant care, while summer allowed grazing and movement outdoors, but children remained attentive, following cats hunting vermin or guiding livestock through pastures. Chronicler Thomas Walsingham noted that seasonal routines reinforced practical skills and moral education, teaching children to anticipate needs, observe behavior, and respond quickly, skills essential for adulthood in a world where survival depended on diligence, foresight, and adaptability to changing conditions. Animals also served as emotional and moral guides. In isolated villages or expansive estates, pets were confidants, playmates, and sources of comfort. French records from Normandy in 1380 describe children speaking to kittens and puppies, feeding and caring for them as a form of emotional expression. Daily tasks such as washing, feeding, and tending to sick animals instilled empathy, patience, and a recognition of life cycles, including birth, illness, and death. In monastic households, novices and children participated in animal care to internalize piety, stewardship, and responsibility, learning moral lessons through observation, practice, and reflection. Household hierarchy reinforced the lessons animals provided. Children observed the roles of different animals. Large hounds slept near the master's chambers, smaller dogs and cats patrolled kitchens and larders, and livestock maintained peripheral positions. By managing animals within this structure, children learned social norms, cooperation, and the importance of order. Tasks like feeding, monitoring, and tending animals taught diligence and accountability, extending practical lessons into moral formation. Play and imitation further reinforced these lessons. Children mimicked hunting, herding, and domestic work, blending imagination with observation, care, and early problem-solving skills. Across Europe, from peasant cottages in East Anglia to noble manors in Burgundy, childhood was deeply intertwined with animal life. Cats, dogs, goats, pigs, and chickens were active participants in education, shaping routines, morals, and emotional growth. They taught vigilance, empathy, responsibility, and practical skill while providing warmth, protection, and companionship. Children learned to read behavior, anticipate needs, and coexist with animals, internalizing lessons in care, survival, and cooperation. In the medieval world, childhood was defined by the presence of these creatures' partners in daily labor, moral development, and social formation, ensuring that the bonds between humans and animals endured into adulthood, inseparable and profoundly formative. Echoes of laughter, the scrape of boots on stone floors, and the soft padding of paws told a story of life inside castles and manors, where humans and animals shared every corner of existence. Within these walls, animals were not simply background figures. They were active participants in domestic life, shaping routines, influencing behavior, and reflecting the hierarchy and culture of the household. Every hall, chamber, and courtyard contained evidence of a delicate balance between warmth, security, utility, and prestige, often punctuated by the quiet vigilance of hounds or the stealthy prowls of cats during the night. At the manor of Sir Hugh de Courtenay in Devon, 1378, hounds slept in chambers adjoining the lord's quarters, their presence a mark of both status and vigilance. Lesser dogs patrolled corridors and kitchens, silently maintaining order. Cats, meanwhile, roamed the pantries and storerooms, controlling vermin and acting as unseen custodians of the household's food stores. Household accounts meticulously recorded food allocations for prized pets alongside provisions for servants and children, demonstrating that the care of animals was intertwined with social standing and daily operations. Even in moments of apparent leisure, animals shaped routines. Hounds were exercised in the yard, cats were encouraged to patrol, and young servants learned their roles by observing and assisting in these tasks. French castles offer similar insights. At Château de Blois in 1385, multiple lap cats and hunting dogs were assigned to specific chambers. Cats often accompanied children and servants, silently teaching attentiveness and care, while hounds remained closer to the lord or lady, symbols of authority and tools of the hunt. Feeding schedules were precise, and bedding was noted in inventories, highlighting the dual purpose of animals as both companions and indicators of wealth. Servants were responsible for ensuring animals remained clean, well-fed, and strategically placed, reinforcing household hierarchy and the subtleties of rank. Observers might notice a greyhound on a velvet cushion near the master's bed, while barn cats patrolled grain stores, blending utility with prestige. The rhythm of daily life, punctuated by these interactions, created a household environment where humans and animals existed in carefully choreographed harmony. Stories from manors in northern England emphasize practicality alongside ritualized care. A Norfolk estate in 1391 documented dogs and cats being rotated indoors according to the seasons, ensuring warmth during harsh winters and hygiene during warmer months. Goats and pigs, often housed in byres connected to the main hall, provided both heat and opportunities for children to learn domestic responsibilities. Chroniclers described instances of children herding livestock or assisting with feeding, absorbing lessons in coordination, patience, and vigilance. These accounts illustrate that castle life, though grand, relied heavily on routine, observation, and the silent guidance of animals. Animals also appeared in extraordinary anecdotes that blended practicality with superstition. In Burgundy, a tabby cat reportedly chased off a nocturnal intruder from a manor kitchen, its hissing and arching back interpreted as both protective and portentous. Stories of hounds alerting to approaching strangers or livestock acting unusually before storms were recorded in household accounts, suggesting that the lines between practical observation and folklore were often blurred. Within these walls, animals shaped perception as much as they shaped domestic life, influencing both behavior and belief. The interplay between animals and social performance was evident in ceremonial contexts as well. Noble hounds accompanied lords and ladies during hunts, serving as extensions of prestige and authority. Lap cats and smaller dogs attended to children, teaching subtle lessons of responsibility and care. Even in meals and feasts, cats and dogs were strategically managed to maintain hygiene and avoid disturbance, reinforcing a disciplined household order where every being, human or animal, had a defined place. From Devon to Blois, Norfolk to Burgundy, stories from castles and manors reveal a world in which animals were inseparable from domestic, educational, and symbolic life. They were teachers, guardians, companions, and status markers, shaping routines and moral lessons alike. Within the echoing corridors and quiet chambers of these stone homes, humans and animals coexisted in intricate patterns of care, hierarchy, and ritual, forming households that were not merely residences, but networks of interdependent lives, where the rhythms of survival, prestige, and companionship intertwined seamlessly, leaving a legacy of interwoven human and animal histories. Shadows stretched across cold stone floors, and the flicker of candlelight revealed a world where the nightly rhythms of humans and animals intertwined, shaping centuries of domestic practice. The habits formed in medieval cottages, manors, and castles did more than ensure warmth or security. They established patterns of care, hierarchy, and coexistence that echoed long after the medieval period. From the shared beds of peasants to the carefully arranged chambers of noble estates, the night was a stage on which domestic life, social order, and survival converged, unfolding in quiet, often unnoticed ways that bound households together. Animals, both working and companion, were central to this nocturnal structure. Dogs curled near doors, ready to alert the household to danger, while cats patrolled benches and lofts, safeguarding grain stores from vermin. Livestock, brought indoors during bitter winters, radiated heat and provided practical lessons for children, teaching responsibility, coordination, and attentiveness. The positioning of each animal reflected social hierarchy as much as practicality. Prized hounds slept close to the lord or lady, lapcats attended to children, and barn animals occupied peripheral spaces. These arrangements created an intricate choreography of movement, care, and observation that structured domestic life, even when humans slept, establishing rhythms that were deeply habitual and culturally reinforced. The architectural and environmental context reinforced these practices. Stone-built manors, timber cottages, and walled estates each demanded adaptations in how animals were accommodated at night. Northern climates encouraged indoor cohabitation, while southern estates utilized stables and courtyards for larger livestock, allowing humans and animals to coexist efficiently while minimizing discomfort. Seasonal shifts further shaped arrangements. Winter required tighter integration for warmth, while summer allowed separation to maintain hygiene and reduce heat. Across regions, families, servants, and children learned to interpret animal behavior, anticipate needs, and respond quickly, forming an intuitive understanding of the delicate balance between humans and creatures under one roof, and ensuring household life remained orderly and secure. Religious and moral frameworks also influenced nighttime practices. Monastic households used animal care as a tool for moral education, teaching novices lessons in stewardship, piety, and empathy. Noble families embedded responsibility and obedience into children's interactions with pets and livestock, reinforcing social hierarchy while cultivating attentiveness and moral growth. Even practical chores, such as milking goats or ensuring animals were positioned near the hearth, carried ethical undertones. Diligence, care, and observation were considered virtues cultivated through daily engagement with living beings. In this way, the domestic sphere became a site where survival, morality, and socialization were inseparably linked, producing a moral as well as practical order. The legacy of these practices extended far beyond the medieval period. Patterns of nighttime animal management informed later household norms, shaping understandings of hygiene, domestic architecture, and human-animal relationships. Heated discussions in Renaissance household manuals, for example, echoed concerns first articulated in the 14th century: proximity of animals to humans, seasonal rotation of livestock, and the moral and practical training of children through animal care. Even folklore, tales of protective cats or vigilant hounds, preserve the memory of nights structured around the rhythms of both human and animal life. These stories, passed down through generations, reinforce the notion that coexistence with animals was not incidental but central to domestic order, shaping expectations and behavior long after the medieval era ended. Cultural memory of medieval nighttime routines influenced urban and rural households into the early modern era. In towns, the lessons of crowded cottages, efficient use of space, the strategic positioning of animals, and the training of children in vigilance remained relevant. In the countryside, estates continued to integrate livestock and pets into domestic life, according to climate, status, and seasonal needs. Across Europe, the blending of practical necessity, social hierarchy, and moral instruction persisted, a testament to the enduring impact of medieval nighttime practices on human-animal relationships and household management, echoing into subsequent generations. Ultimately, the nighttime world of medieval Europe was a complex ecosystem of interdependence. The legacy of these practices lies not only in architectural layouts, choreographed routines, or surviving inventories, but in the deep understanding they fostered of coexistence, responsibility, and care. By observing and managing animals during the long nights, Medieval humans cultivated skills, values, and routines that shaped generations. These nocturnal habits reveal a past where survival, comfort, hierarchy, and moral education were inseparably intertwined, leaving a lasting imprint on the structure of domestic life and the human-animal bond.